Money mindset in nonprofits. Seven key numbers to know about your nonprofit to change panic for planning. That's what I want to talk about. Numbers are quite scary things, right? And that's why nonprofit leaders and other people in nonprofits try to avoid looking at or thinking about or talking about numbers, and they prefer to talk about the vision and the mission and the activities instead, right? But you and we know that in order to be able to have an impact in this world and work on your vision and mission as a nonprofit, we need to also invest in the back end of the work that we do. We need to invest in fundraising, and we need to invest in proper people management and finance management to make sure that our nonprofit can be stable, sustainable, and successful, and have an effective way of achieving impact in this world, right? So that's why I want to share with you 7 numbers that are going to help you focus on the key things and make sure that you're on the right way with your stable and sustainable nonprofit. And the first number that I want to talk about actually is to do with your team. Your team is your biggest asset, of course. That's the people who are actually implementing the things that your nonprofit wants to achieve. And it's therefore super important for you to make sure that your team, the members of your team, are feeling good and have everything that they need to deliver great quality work, right? And so you don't really need to become a psychologist or learn about telepathy, reading people's minds to understand how your team is doing and to understand what you might need to do to make them feel better, because you have a tool, and it's a number tool. It's the timesheets, right? If you look at the timesheets, you can see how people are spending their time, what's eating up most of their time, and you can consider whether that's actually the thing that you think is really the most important thing for them to focus on and to spend all their time on, right? And if there is a discrepancy there, this is a starting point for a conversation that you can have with your team members about how they're spending their time and how they feel about it, right? Maybe they're spending a lot of time on something that they don't like doing. And maybe that's making them feel overloaded because they feel like they're spending so much time on something that they don't like. Very often you will hear something about admin or bureaucracy or logistics or finance, things like that, when people talk about the things that they don't like spending time on. So you're prepared now. But this is something that you can then look at together and discuss and see how that could be solved. It could also be that actually they might not have all the skills they need in order to be able to perform a certain task properly and easily, and that it might help them to go on a course or maybe to learn something from a colleague on the job. It could also be that they're a perfectionist and that they're spending way more time than is needed because everything needs to be just so for them. And then that's also something that you can talk about. But it could also be that they're overloaded, for example, because you simply don't have enough people on the team. And maybe that becomes clear to you when you're looking at the timesheets and talking with your team members about how they spend their time and where they feel the bottlenecks are. Yes, so looking at the timesheets and having a conversation with your team is a very good tool to make sure that you're on top of managing your team properly and taking good care of the well-being of your team members and your team as a whole. So that's the first type of number that I want you to look at and be on top of. Then, of course, there I have for you 3 money numbers to look at and to monitor and to be on top of. And the first is your operation costs, your general costs. So, do you know what your needs are to keep going with your organization outside all your project activities and expenses? So, what are the costs that you need to make to have an office, to have everything in place to support your team with all the equipment and other things that they need? what are all the things that you need and what's the price of that? What's the cost of that? Do you have that number in your head by month and by year? Because if you know that number, if you know, like, okay, I have a team of 5 people and I need this amount to keep that team going, to have an office, to have my website, to have some other general things that I cannot allocate to a project because they're not specifically for one project, but they're just needed for the organization as a whole. If you have that number, if you know how much money you need for that per month or per year, um, or how much money you would like to be able to invest in that to build a solid, stable, and sustainable team and organization, then you can start planning and thinking about how can I make sure that I get that money coming in through different ways, through your project proposals, or maybe through having other sources of income that could cover those costs. So that's the first money number I want you to know and look at and monitor and take care of. The second money number that you need to really have a grip on is your cash flow. So do you know how much money is coming in every month and when? And do you know how much money is going out every month and when? And if you combine those two flows, inflow and outflow, what does it look like? Can you be sure that you can pay the salaries of your golden team in time this month, 6 months from now, 12 months from now? And if not, if you see a gap that you're planning to do payments, or you're going to need to do payments at a certain time when you don't have enough money on the bank account according to your projection, then you know that you need to do something, right? Then you need to maybe decrease your expenses. Maybe you need to delay some expenses. Maybe you need to work on getting more income. That's the never ending story in nonprofits, of course. But it could also be that it could be very simply solved by prioritizing your next donor report, right? Sometimes we forget that if we send in our progress reports, narrative, financial, in time with a next request for the next installment in time, then we might get our money on the bank account sooner. And that's something that I've seen a lot that we overlook, and that this is a very simple way to make sure that we have the money that we need on the bank account at the moment that we need to have it there, so that we can pay salaries and other necessary things. The third money number that I want you to know and have a look at and plan for is your buffer, your reserves. So how much money have you been able to save up from all the work that you've been doing, from all the fundraising campaigns that you've been running? How much money are you able to save as a buffer for general expenses to be there in case of an emergency or a funding gap? Yeah, for example, if one grant ends and a next grant starts maybe 3-4 months later, do you have money in your reserves as a buffer to cover the ongoing costs for that period of 3-4 months between the end of one grant and the start of the next? Or do you have money that you can use in case of an emergency or a catastrophe, right? So in order to know how much money you have, of course, you need to have your finances in order. But in order to know if that's enough to cover that funding gap or to cover a catastrophe, you need to have an idea of what is the thing that you would need to cover. Yeah, so what are the operational costs, for example, for the 3 or 4 month funding gap that you need to be able to cover, so that you know how much money do you need to have for that in your buffer. And the same is, you can probably already think of some emergencies or calamities that might occur and that might require some financial investments from your side. And you can make an estimate of what the cost of that would be, so that you know, okay, if I would have this amount in my buffer, I could actually sleep at night, because I would know that if there's a funding gap of 3 months and if this emergency happens, I have enough money saved up and I'm ready for that, right? I don't need to panic straight away because I have at least for a few months or for one emergency, enough money to cover all of that. So now I'm curious, which of these 4 numbers are you actually already monitoring, and do you know and could you share? So are you monitoring the hours, the time spent? Are you monitoring the cash flow? Are you aware of your organizational costs, your general operational costs? And do you know what would be a good buffer size for you to have? And do you know how far away you are at this moment from having that amount of money in your buffers? I'm really curious to know. So if you have a moment, please jump into the comments and let me know which of those 4 numbers you are already monitoring and are in control of. I'm Suzanne Bakker. I'm a nonprofit operations strategist, and I like to talk about all of these things: finance, admin, paperwork, contracting, HR, management, fundraising, and more. And I talk about that in this channel. So feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you would like to be notified when my next video drops. If you prefer reading, then I invite you to click the link below and to join my newsletter list so that you will receive my stories on Mondays and Thursdays with nonprofit operations topics. So let's go back to the numbers, right? I shared with you a team number and 3 money numbers. And now I have for you 2 numbers that I think many of your colleagues aren't really monitoring. So if you're going to be monitoring this, you will be already one step ahead of other nonprofit leaders. And the first number is your success rate. So do you really know the numbers, the percentages and the amounts of your fundraising success? So do you know how much money you've been able to generate by donor or by campaign in the last year? Do you know maybe different demographical information about those donors who contributed? Do you know how many of your project proposals are approved without changes or maybe with some small changes? And do you know what kind of donors have the biggest appreciation and the biggest approval rate for your project proposals? I'm curious to know. If you want, you can jump into the comments and let me know. This is super important to know, of course, right? If you know that a certain type of campaign is very appreciated by a certain type of donors, maybe private individual people or maybe business donors, sponsors, then you know that maybe if I tweak this campaign a bit, if I scale it, I can more easily generate more income next year because I already know what is successful, what speaks to these type of people, and I have the proof of that. I have the data for that, and I have the understanding of the data for that. And the same is true, of course, for project proposals. And knowing your success rate and understanding what is the cause of the success rate will help you focus your very precious time and energy that you want to spend on fundraising to really focus on the things that are going to have the biggest success for your nonprofit, right? So that you're not launching a campaign that's totally dead on arrival, as they say, that's totally not appreciated by your donors and you don't get a lot of money coming in from that, or that you're not spending a lot of time preparing a project proposal for a donor where you could already have known by looking at your success rate that the chance of success was very, very low. Yeah, so then you know that you can spend your time better on other things, scaling things that have been successful, or building stronger relations with existing donors to be sure that if they have an opportunity for follow-up grants, that you're the first that they will think of, right? So be clever about how you spend your precious time for fundraising by looking at your success rate and by really understanding the data of your success rate. And this is something that many of your colleagues aren't really looking at or aren't really using strategically. So be clever and look at your past success to plan your future success accordingly. Another number that other colleagues probably don't look at as much as you're going to do after watching this video is the pipeline number. So how many campaigns do you have prepared and ready to be launched right now? How many project proposals have you prepared and submitted to donors and you're waiting to hear back from them right now? Do you know? If you know, you can type yes in the comments, of course, if you want. So this is something that's super important, right? Because it's always good to have things ready, waiting, pending to become a success, especially, and I know this from experience, when when you receive a rejection, right? So when a donor sends you, no, we're not able to support your project proposal, it doesn't meet our requirements or whatever reason they give, this is a dark moment, right? When they say no, when you're rejected, when your proposal is rejected, but it feels like you're rejected, right? It is much easier to handle such a moment when you can think like, okay, this is a no, that's bad. I feel it in my stomach, but I also know in my head and in my heart that at this moment I have 2 or 3 other proposals that are sitting at donors' desks, and I think that at least one of them will be successful. And so after I've taken a moment to recover from this rejection, I'm going to start looking for another grant opportunity, but I already have 3 grant opportunities waiting to happen. I prepared them, they're pending. Any day I can hear back from those donors. Or when you can think like, yeah, I have that campaign already prepared, ready to roll. It was planned to start next week, so that's a great timing because now we know that we don't get this grant, so we need really to go all in with this campaign to make sure that we can do the things that we need to do to serve our community or cause, right? It's much easier to handle this kind of rejection and disappointment when you know that you're already prepared for the future and the future is already waiting to happen, right? That's the pipeline for you. Then another number that's super important is your impact number. And of course, if you've been watching my videos, you know that impact isn't necessarily about numbers, but it starts with a number very often. It could be that when you want to talk about the success of your nonprofit, the impact that you're creating for the community or the cause that you're serving, that you could say like, we have been able to help 5 girls go to school and get a diploma. That's what we've done. And that's the start of impact, right? Because then you have a number, we know it's about girls and school and a diploma. And then to complete your impact story or marketing around impact, you need a story that will show exactly what it's like for one of those 5 girls, how her life has changed because of being able to go to school, because of that diploma. It could also be a story about her family. It could be a story about another girl in the community who hasn't gone to school and doesn't have a diploma, but has seen that the other girl has and now has dreams. Now she knows that it's possible for me as a girl to go to school, to get a diploma, to have a future as a businesswoman or whatever the girl with the diploma is going to do, right? So these impact stories can start from a number, and you need to know the number, but especially you need to be able to know the story and to be able to tell the story in a way that it speaks to the person that you're talking to. And you need to be able to have those numbers and those stories ready to share wherever you are, to whomever you're speaking, and whenever they ask or might seem interested in hearing that, right? And it's super important that you're always able to have up-to-date numbers, not last year's numbers, but today's numbers, and that you have fresh stories, right? So that your the people that you're talking to, your potential donors, supporters, stakeholders, other people, don't hear the same story once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but that they can hear fresh stories and that they can start feeling that your impact is much bigger than they could have thought possible, right? I'm guessing that this number and these stories are probably things that are easy for you to be on top of and to follow, to monitor, and to be able to find motivation to keep your knowledge about this updated, right? This is easy because this feels like it's totally connected to your vision and your mission and to the key reason why you joined that nonprofit or why you created that nonprofit. So I'm guessing this number is the easiest for you to remember and to know. And if I would wake you up in the middle of the night, you would probably be able to tell me a story and give me a number. Am I right? Please tell me in the comments below. So these are all important things that I shared with you. And knowing these numbers will help you plan for whenever things get tricky or hard or difficult, scary maybe, when it comes to managing your nonprofit, keeping it stable and keeping your staff sane as well, right? Without going into full-blown panic if something doesn't look right. So these are key numbers to know, especially for when things get tough, when you face a crisis, a financial crisis, or any other type of crisis. And that's what I would like to talk to you about in the next video, about how you can handle crisis. And I will share some examples of how I handled financial and other crises in different nonprofits that I worked in. I'm looking forward to seeing you there.